You ready, Greg?
Let's go, Jay.
You're listening to The Success Paradigm with your hosts, Jay Atkins and Greg Gray.
All right, Greg, you ready to be stimulated today?
Let's, okay, I don't think you've ever opened a podcast exactly like that before, but I'm going to roll with it and say, absolutely, I am.
I should have said mentally stimulated. I apologize.
As can't put the genie back in the bottle. Let's go to the intro. Hurry, quickly.
Well, this is a good friend of mine, Greg, that I've had several mentally stimulating conversations with. So I thought it would be really cool to bring him on here and get him a part of the Success Paradigm. So Thad is a very driven and extensively experienced professional, highly adept at providing policy development and risk analytics excellence across the investment banking, asset management, and equities markets. His history includes the investment banking, institutional training, a professionalship, a design and launch of a business development strategies building B2C supply chains. And outside of work, you will generally find Thad surrounded by trees and water with friends and family. So that is Thad Beversdorf that we're going to be interviewing today. And I'm going to give you my own official, which I kindly did in the beginning. And that is Thad is a very, when I've described him to you, he is an intellect. I'll let him tell you his story, but has many, many years of college. I know our friends used to make fun of him for being a college student of many, many years. And I don't even know how many degrees he has, but he's a very, very smart individual. He has a very different perspective on life. He has a very different drive, which is what mentally stimulates me. And he's just a good soul. And I think having all of those together is what creates success in people like that. So I want to kind of dig into that and hear his story, because what I see on the outside and what people see on the outside of that is not really what's all on the inside and all what happened. And Thad, what I want to talk to you about today is, what is that story? Where did it all start for you? Why do you have the drive? Why do you have the drive to have so much information in your brain? And what are you going to do with it? And what's the ultimate goal for you? So let's start there. Let's talk about Thad and where it all started as a kid, if it was your parents or who put that in you to just gain all of this information, and then what you're doing with it now.
Right. Well, thanks for the introduction, guys, and I'm super happy to be here. I think this is a great program that you guys do. Yeah. So hopping right into it, the story, I guess, as a kid, Jay, as you know, I grew up in a small town in Canada, and my a pretty typical household. My father was a professor actually at a small university up there. He was a geneticist. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom and worked. So the household itself was pretty normal. It was, on the dark side of kids' lives, it was a bit of an angry household, and and so, which I think is kind of typical for back in the 80s and 90s compared to today's, what you see today. I think a lot of kids would kind of look at today's upbringing versus what they experienced in the 80s and think, wow, there's a big difference in terms of just mentality of how you raise kids and what is right and what is wrong, or what is kosher and what isn't. But I don't know that it was, I don't know that there was anything in that upbringing that created the drive, other than, my father was a big academic, and but they didn't pay a lot of attention to my grades. In fact, they held, I was going to skip a couple grades, and they actually shut that down. So they thought it would be bad as a development as a child to do that. And I also thought it would be bad for me to move into my sister's class, who was a couple years older than me. So outside of that, I don't really know. As you said, if you look at me on the outside, you expect one thing. I think on the inside, there's something slightly different. From the outside to the inside, that I think doesn't surprise people, is I always have had kind of an anti-authoritative or kind of an anti-authoritarian perspective, where I kind of was always a contrarian. I went against the grain. I always questioned things. I didn't necessarily believe the narrative. In fact, I've got a quote from Nikola Tesla on my arm that suggests or says, antisocial behavior is a trait of intelligence in a world full of conformists. And again, you've got to take it into context of what that means back in his day. It doesn't mean, a lot of the antisocial behavior, destructive behavior. What it means is antisocial behavior back then was challenging the narrative and questioning the modern science or the old science, and having, kind of having that mentality, a contrarian mentality. And I think that naturally goes into being inquisitive, right? Just about things in general. You can accept the narrative or you can challenge the narrative. But ultimately it was just a normal childhood. I got in too much trouble as a kid, coming kind of from an angry household. I fought a lot, and that got me into a bit of trouble, as a young man. And, there was a point where I think the system worked for me. I got kind of a kick in the butt by the law, and I made, it worked for me, where very early on, before I got too deep down the wrong path, I decided that there's probably a better way. And so I used that energy to focus on academics. As you said, I went through a long stint of just studying. I became kind of a career student. I focused a lot on business, economics, philosophy, sociology, psychology. And so I kind of went through this whole phase where I was studying a lot. I went down to Raleigh from Canada, because I kind of followed my sister down there and met a group of guys that Jay's good friends with. And from there, I decided that I was going to actually get a job. and so, I think at that point I was probably 26 or 27 before I got my first real job. At this point, I'd had a number of university degrees, and so I did. I went out, and it was a bit of an unorthodox thing. When I decided to go get a job, it was after the .com crash of 2001. And so despite the fact that I had a good academic pedigree, I ended up taking whatever I could get, which was an internal auditor job at a bank, which is about as low as you can go. The rung below me was the mailroom. And so I moved into that job and realized that you're just going to have to dig it out. You're going to have to work it. And I did. And so at that point, that's just kind of where the drive came in to see, okay, well, I'm here. I feel like I should have gotten more, but I didn't, right? I am where I am. I think I negotiated at the time for $34,000 a year, and I felt pretty good that I got that. And so, you're barely paying the bills. You're sharing a room. At this point, I'm living in Chicago. And there's nothing you can really do about it other than dig your heels in and work. And I guess what happened for me, and this will come to play a bit further on in the story, is understanding what success was at that point. I didn't think about it, right? I was in an investment bank. I was not in a great role, but I knew there was opportunity there. And so you dig in and you do what you can do. I ended up moving up very quickly. Within about 7 years, I went from internal auditor to a senior vice president in my early 30s, in charge of about 50 guys globally, running one of the largest hard commodities trading desks in the world. And I think what happens through that process is when you get into a certain context, like an investment bank, success is defined for you. Everybody knows what the end game is, which is money. And so everybody's chasing the same bone inside the bank. And the nice thing about the financial sector like that is if you produce, you will move up. If you don't, you will leave the industry. And so ultimately at the top, you get a lot of very hungry, very ambitious, very smart folks who are all going after the same thing. And this is kind of where the story gets interesting. So I'm at this point in my life, a kid from a small town in Canada who got in some trouble with the law, 10 years on, I'm in this role as kind of a senior executive at one of the largest investment banks in the world, making 7 figures, and I'm miserable. And so I'm going to work every day, and I'm trying to figure out in my own head, I'm trying to understand the cognitive dissonance that's happening, because everything tells me I'm on the right track. I'm doing quite well. Everybody's looking at me and talking about me as though, I've rocketed up through I'm a shining star in the bank. I'm coming to work every day just angry. I'm unhappy, and my entire life around me feels unhappy. And this was one of the kind of the epic moments in my life where, after about a year of doing this, you're wondering, man, I've got all these, I've got houses, I've got cars, I've got all these things. I had cars that I hadn't driven because I was working all the time. And so it started to hit me that maybe what appears to be success isn't success for me, right? And it really struck me, I think, one day, and I don't know why this happened, but I remember thinking back to when I took that internal auditor job for $34,000 a year, and I was barely able to pay the bills, and I had roommates, and I was struggling monetarily, financially, but I was happier than I had ever been in my life. And I tried to understand this, 10 years later, of what's the difference here? How could this be? How could I be so much happier back then and not today, when I'm clearly much more successful today than I was back then? What I realized was back, when I had just started, I was in a new city. I had lots of friends. Success for me at that point in my life was those personal relationships that I was building. It was the time out at the bars. It was the laughter. It was the drinks. It was the relationship building. And so success at that time for me, I was being successful at what was valuable to me at the time. As I got into kind of this fast track in the bank, I gave a lot of that up. And Jay, you probably remember this, but I let go of almost all of my friendships for almost 10 years, where I wasn't talking, I wasn't replying to emails anymore. I wasn't answering the phone when the group of guys would call, the friends would call. I wasn't interested in anything other than inside work and building, building or reaching for the objectives that were defined by my work. And so after about a year of being angry, I did what everybody told me not to do, which was I walked away from all of it. I gave up the big income. And it was a war to get out of there. To leave a bank at that point in fact, there's probably still lawsuits today going on about it that I don't even know about. But to try to get out of a contract like that when you're a top producer for a bank is very difficult. They don't want to let go of that money, and they make it very difficult for you. So when you make that choice to walk away, it impacts so many things in your life. The people in my life at the time close to me, they said, look, go get a nice haircut and another red sports car. You're just going through a midlife crisis. Everything will be fine. Don't leave what you've built here. But I knew it was deeper than that. I knew there was something wrong. And again, it was an acknowledgement that the success I had built wasn't valuable to me. And so I had given up a lot. It had cost me a lot to get to that kind of end goal, which was a big title and a lot of money. But I had spent 10 years, and the journey wasn't enjoyable, and the end goal wasn't valuable when I got it. And so I think I was more disappointed almost in what I had done. Or guess what I had wasted, what I felt like I had wasted. Looking back at it now, I don't think it was as big of a waste as it felt like in the moment. But so I did. I walked away, and I didn't know what I was going to do next. I just knew that it didn't feel right. I was at a point in my life where I was in my mid to late 30s, and my thought process was, I can just keep doing this at this point for the rest of my life, but if I'm going to change, this is probably where I've got to make that change. And so I did, kind of to the despair of everybody around me. I walked away, and it was a painful thing, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I, I went out and I bought a bunch of land, and I got some of my friends from Canada, and we bought a trailer and we built a cabin for me in the middle of the woods in northern Michigan. And I spent 3 years there, living in the middle of the woods, and did a lot of reading that I wanted to do. I learned a lot of the things that I wanted to learn. And like the nerd that I was, a lot of what I read was, I dug into the Congressional Library online and I read a lot of things about the way the system works. And from there, I created a foundation called the Institute for Sensible Economics, where myself and a few other contrarian economists around the country studied income disparity and wealth gap. And we became very interested in it because a lot of the publications that we were writing for, the response that we got on that topic was insane. And what it told us was, this is an issue that is talked about on a kind of very prima facie way, but rarely gets to the heart of the issue. And I think part of that is because when you start talking about economics and finance to kind of the masses, they glaze over because they've been told, and it's been expressed to them in kind of a context of Gaussian matrices and Brownian motion. And that's intentional by the PhD economists, we thought, because they don't want people involved in these discussions. They don't want people involved in these policy decisions. And so let's make it as boring and as complex as possible, and they'll let us do whatever we want to do. And you really could see that. And so what we tried to do through our foundation was to talk about economics and finance and these things that really impact your everyday life, and why income disparity exists, and why the wealth gap has been expanding for 40 years, despite the fact that every economic policymaker, their stated objective is to undo that. But with every policy, it gets deeper and wider and worse. And we thought, okay, our mantra inside the foundation was, idiots or liars, right? The policymakers have to be one or the other. And it wasn't really, we weren't trying to be derogatory. We're trying to be very syllogistic about it, that if you continue to do the same thing and have the same paradigm and implement policies around that paradigm over and over and over again, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times, okay, it's a mistake. But when you're doing it for 4 or 5 decades and see that the observable data is always in absolute contradiction to your stated objective, then I'm just stating the obvious in the fact that you're either an idiot or a liar, meaning that you're either not competent in your job or you're disingenuous about the stated objective, right? And so we did a lot of research and we did a lot of studies, and we wrote a lot across a lot of financial and economic platforms, some very popular, well-known, and some kind of what people would consider, the underground publications. But we really tried to get the data and the information out there in a digestible way, because we think at the end of the day, economics is very simple. It's just relationships, right? It's, if I do this, what happens over here? And everybody can kind of understand that. And so from that, we decided, I guess I kind of got bored just talking about it. And in fact, our followers did too. The people that were following us and reading our stuff, at a certain point, they were very, very verbal about the fact that, okay, we understand the problem. What's the solution?
Right.
And that was a harder problem, right? Like we were on a roll talking about why everything kind of was not great for the masses. But when they started asking us, what do we do with it? We weren't really sure. And we kind of ignored it for a while until the calls for, okay, look, if you're not going to talk about solutions, then this is getting boring. And so it forced us into a kind of a position shift where we started saying, okay, if one had the authority and the power, like the policy making persuasion to make a change, what would that change look like? And so for me, once we thought that we had a pretty good grasp of what that solution needed to be, and it wasn't just our foundation that did this. NYU, UCLA, Harvard all did studies and came to similar conclusions. And it's very simple, really. It was mega corporations do a very poor job at taking the money that we spend with them and kind of reinvesting that money back into the economy in a way that has a large money multiplier effect, meaning that it kind of filters through the economy. They're very good at taking the money that we spend with them and shifting it into the financial system through dividends and buybacks. And again, this was kind of our jaded contrarian view of things. UCLA, Harvard, NYU all came to the same conclusions through years of research. What the research also told us was that small businesses, right, independently owned businesses, non-publicly traded companies did a really, really good job of taking the money that we spend with them and reinvesting that back into the economy in a way that has a really stimulative economic impact. And so for me, what kind of translated or transitioned out of that foundation was something called indie goods. And this is where we get to what I've been doing for the past 4 years. And this is kind of ends up in one of the biggest failures of my life. But what we thought we could do was kind of transition out of the foundation, build a distribution chain, kind of a new producer to customer distribution chain where we make it very easy for family-owned factories and producers to get products in a very Amazon-esque way to customers' front doorstep in 2 hours or less. And so we spent 4 years on this, and we were on a pretty good roll. It was very hard at the beginning to get people on, but eventually we were partnered with over 300 family-owned factories in more than 200 cities in the U.S. And we were expanding, and we changed the model a couple times, and ultimately got to a model where we were based out of Raleigh. We had multiple stores, we had a warehouse, we had vans and drivers, and we were essentially beating Amazon to your front door. And so things were going quite well. Through 2019, we started spending more capital. We started expanding the operations into the holiday season. Things went quite well. We continued to expand through January 2020. And then we got into kind of where we're at today, which is the virus that came in and the economic lockdowns that happened. As everybody's kind of aware, the small businesses really took it on the chin. And that was our whole bread and butter. So we had built a business model around facilitating small businesses, small producers around the country, and they couldn't survive. What we realized quite quickly was when we realized the lockdowns weren't going to end within 2 or 3 weeks, and talking to our production partners around the country, which was actually quite sad. About 30 to 40% of them suggested they could hang on for maybe 2 months. The rest thought maybe through August. And so we had a decision to make, and it was this is kind of where your heart and your head get separated, where we really wanted to carry on with this, but we had a certain amount of capital, and we had just spent a tremendous amount of capital over the past 6 months, and everything was shut down, and our supply chain was imploding, on a daily basis. We were watching more families kind of throw in the towel. So I ended up winding it all down after 4 years. And it was a kind of a sad thing because we had gotten close to a lot of our production partners. We knew the families we knew the factory owners. We even knew some of the workers. We had established relationships with folks. And so we shut it down. And so it threw me into where we're at today, which is, you have a lot of thoughts go through your head about success and failure. And you look back over your life and you try to pinpoint certain decisions that you've made over that time period. And you have some regrets and you think ifs and buts, but you are where you are. And I think you try to, I guess, what do they say? That you try to learn from it all. And you try to dig your heels in and redefine what success is going to be going forward. So that's guys, that's where we're at right now. It's been that's kind of the story of that and where I was and how I got to be and kind of outside your normal pathways, I guess, of a cubicle and 9 to 5 job. But somehow I've managed to survive up to this point.
Well, I will tell you, so Thad, we've had a number of guests on the Success Paradigm. I think you have broken through and singularly hold a space where, because we talk about, getting through the rough patches and how you came out on the other side. So I think you may be singularly the person or represent an entity that is square in the middle of being punched in the throat, like right during the podcast, like right in the middle of it, which I think is really interesting. Because it's harder to feel the lessons inside it than it is after it. I mean, being able to kind of look in the rearview mirror and be introspective or retrospective, you have time, the separation of time lets you kind of see things differently. But you're in the middle right now of something that, just like in some ways of looking at it, virtually everybody is in the middle of something that we could not have even imagined, 7, 8 months ago. I mean, the most strange Stephen King novel, if someone would have written it and this would have been it, it's like, wow, that is a really interesting book. I hope that never happens. And this is where we are. So
Right.
the question that and so thank you for your transparency, because I don't know that everybody would necessarily say, yeah, I just got punched in the throat on the last email. I feel it right here. They got me like right here. Because that transparency, I think, is something a lot of people can relate to, and they can feel it, especially small business owners. So you're in the middle of it. So my question to you is, this guy who is, and we're kind of kindred spirits. And I'm a natural contrarian as well. I think the more you learn, the more you question, not simply to become contrary, but because the more you learn, the more you know, the more context you have. It's like, wait a minute. So somebody's already tried to spin this tale a couple of thousand years ago, or a couple of 100 years ago, or 2 decades ago. So I've seen this one before, and I know what this is. It's not what it seems to be. And so it doesn't make you cynical, but it does make you careful with what you hear and what you believe. So I totally get that. So right now, in the middle of a sore throat, not from the inside out, but from the outside in, what are you thinking about now that as you're kind of reassessing or moving these pieces around success, what's going through your head right now that you think would be helpful for people to be able to hear or understand?
Right. So, yeah. And I think, and on the transparency thing is, I think it's, for me anyway, it's almost therapeutic, right? It's something that I've always done. And I think if you ask Jay or any of my friends, I've always kind of marched to the beat of my own drum. And it's one of those things where, I think you've got to just be comfortable with where you're at, be open. And one of the nice things about transparency is if you're always trying to project something that isn't, you miss out on opportunities, right? And you never know where those opportunities are going to come from. And if you're projecting a reality that isn't kind of true, there'll be opportunities, but they won't line up with your reality in a moment, right? And so I've often found that when you're just very straight about the position, and again, part of that is just security, right? And I think a lot of people struggle with failure as something that's a reflection upon them, rather than something that just naturally occurs when you take risks. And so, risk as a trader, this is something that's very kind of ingrained in me, which is risk reward, or if you're a gambler too in the casino, you understand that 51-49, right? 51 success and 49 failure is a great kind of odds. And over the long time, you're going to have good success with those odds. I think right now, it goes back to opportunity and chaos. So what we're doing right now is we're kind of recalibrating, right? So when I say we wound it down, we've still got capital. I think it's not a smart time to kind of relaunch a business. I think there's still a lot of chaos out there, but in that, we're trying to find various opportunities. There's been a shift in culture, a shift in behavior. And anytime that you've got a major shift like that, there's going to be voids in kind of the infrastructure to facilitate that new cultural behavior. And so right now, that's what we're looking at. We're testing a lot of models out in the marketplace right now. And so for me, it's exciting, right? The failure, it was like when I took it on the chin, I had a couple months where, I kind of walked around with my tail between my legs and felt sorry for myself. But at the same time, as you come out of that, or you, at a certain point, and it's a fair kind of reaction to have to failure. But at a certain point, get excited again about the opportunity and the chaos that's out there. So yeah, I think what I would, if there's other people, and I know there are other people who are kind of in similar situations, give yourself a couple minutes, right, to sulk, and then kind of wind that down. And it's just about focus, right? Success is really just about focus. And again, it's like what you'll see, and what I've seen anyway, and I think most people have kind of seen this, is that cultural shift, that behavioral shift that we've seen is a reevaluation of what success means, a reevaluation of what our goals are. You see a lot of people moving away from the cities. You see a lot of people spending more time with their families. Even though things are reopening, we're spending less time at some of those old time vacuums. And we're choosing not to go back to those activities, and we're choosing new activities. So I think it's a time where people are really assessing whether it was forced or not. It's probably a good thing. A reassessment of what success looks like to us and to our families now. So having that kind of cognitive thought process about things that are incredibly important that we typically or historically have not spent a lot of time thinking about, right?
Right.
When things are on a roll, when the economy's running and everybody's doing well, it's just inertia. You just go, you get up every day and you do the same thing, and you hope, you try to do it really well. But rarely do you step back when things are good and say, are things really good? Like, it's easy, but is this really where I want to be?
Right.
So I would say, yeah, if I have any advice to people, be excited about the opportunities and the chaos. It's sometimes easier said than done when you've got kids and it's hard to pay the bills. But that doesn't mean you should let yourself off the hook.
So, that question you asked, Greg, was great, because as I was hearing that story, the transparency I appreciated so much, because I think a lot of people try to be something that they're not. And you don't really learn when you're trying to be something that you're not. But I love that, you're on to what's next. Even though you said, hey, we had to wind it down, that didn't mean quit. And I think a lot of people, when they hear wind down, they hear give up, they hear quit. And I think that question was great, because I knew that's not what you were going to do. And then, so my question to you, I know you said, your dad was a professor and all that, but who in your life has been a great mentor to you, Dad, that you kind of, have these conversations with even now, or when you're going through something like this? I mean, I know you go in the woods by yourself for 3 years and study and learn things, but also, I also know that you talk to a lot of people, and who is that? Like, who do you count on when you're unsure of the next step that you're going to take?
Yeah, it's a good question. I tell you, in terms of a mentor, probably the person that had the most profound impact on me as a professional, probably doesn't even know that they had that impact on me. It was a guy called Rick Farina, and he was a CEO of the first bank trading company that I worked for. Just a big giant of a man. And so anecdotally, he's the kind of guy where we had gone out, the power markets, the electricity markets were just coming into play. And there was a lot of gray area in terms of what was right and what was wrong. There was a tremendous amount of risk, but a tremendous amount of money to be made. And I worked very closely with another group, and we were basically bringing in a huge deal around the power markets. And we sat down before anything kind of finally got final approval, we had to sit in front of Rick Farina, the CEO, and run it past him. And I thought it's just a no-brainer. The amount of money that was going to be generated from this was incredible. And so we sat there, we thought we were going to get the final approval, no problem. And he vetoed it. And he said, the reason I'm vetoing this is because I'm responsible for thousands of employees and their families. And while this is a huge deal, the amount of risk around this is greater than I'm willing to risk those thousands of families going forward. And it stunned me because up to this point in that world, I had never seen, not even a glimpse of the kind of empathy. There was no consideration outside of the amount of profit that we were going to make. And that moment in time, and I was fortunate enough I was very close with him. I was lucky enough to get a cubicle at the time, very close to his office. So he walked by me all the time, and we just got to know each other that way. So I got to know this guy as a man, and that was for me. Even though he's not in my life, at this time, he was for a number of years. And when you're lucky enough to be around a person like that for a number of years, you carry those lessons with you. And what I find is so often situations will arise and a lesson from that man will pop back into my head. So it's almost as if he's still there with me having a conversation. I think these lessons are, if you can carry some of these lessons forward with you, it's a really special thing to have. And as mentors today, I'm an introvert, and it's probably one of my downfalls is I don't reach out to people enough. I know, Jay, the last time we got together, and I've talked to a lot of, in fact, I just talked about it 2 days ago. It came up that, you reached out and we went out and we, we got together and we sat, we had a conversation. We hadn't seen each other for quite some time. And I walked away from a meeting like that where you gave me information that I normally wouldn't have in me, which was you gave me some books to read. You talked about meditation. You talked about things that in the midst of running a company and doing this stuff, that if it's not part of your day-to-day life. So friends surprisingly come in, and maybe that's not surprising, but it's surprising to somebody like me that I don't expect it and I don't reach out for it. And when someone like you reaches out to me, when a friend reaches out to me, and I kind of open up because the opportunity is there, I do really try to take those moments and learn from them, right? I don't know if it was kind of a profound moment for you where you probably thought anything about it afterwards, but I've talked about that meeting probably 10 or 15 times and talked about the books and the meditation and those things that I carry with it. So I probably do a poor job of looking for that stuff. When it comes, it does strike me as quite profound.
Well, I wanted to meet with you that day, just because we hadn't caught up. The last time we were together was when you were down for your birthday, and we went out on the boat, and had that rain out that we were there, and Darren, a good friend of ours, was talking about you, and he was talking about all the stuff that you were doing, and I was just like, okay, I need, because I remember when we met, like I just remember being blown away by you the first time, and then the second time, and the third time, and we spent like 2 days together in close quarters on my small boat at the time. And I just always remember, like, I like to be stimulated mentally by people. And I was like, I need to talk to Thad because I knew I could learn something from you, because the things that Darren was telling me about what you're doing in your business, I haven't heard of before. And I know, I do this with everybody. I ask you lots of questions. And so I learned a lot, even about business, right? Because I'm always trying to take my business and businesses to the next level. So yeah, I mean, I took a lot away from that conversation, that, just what you said about the risk, right? And you're taking risk. And you said, failure happens with risks. I mean, that's the thing. People are so afraid of failure that they don't ever take risks. And to me, I walked away just saying, and this guy has balls, man. Like, he has balls. Like, the things that he's talking about doing is so, that's why I said, like, Elon Musk, right? You were trying to take something that someone's done on a small scale, on a big scale, but also help people. And again, what you just talked about, like what you pay attention to. The thing is you have to pay attention, and you pay attention like to that CEO, right? Like that decision, that culture is all about bottom line. It's all about money and how much money we can make, from the CEO, president to the investors, investment bankers, all the people down the line, it's all about money. And you just saw someone say, I have empathy. I care about these 1,000 people that work for me. And I think that's what I also heard about your investors' money that was investing in your company. I heard that several times in the conversation that I was having with you. And that's what I walked away with is, you're more concerned about making sure your investors are paid back. They're making money out of this than you paying yourself. And so that's what I walked away meeting you that day. So, and I think you have to look for it. Every conversation, there's something, even if it's what not to do or how someone's coming across. Like the thing is, and I'm going to bring this up because some people judge a book by its cover, right? Like when I met you at first, you didn't have the tattoos. Then I met you and you have tattoos, and it's like it was kind of your revolt against like the suit and tie and like your way of doing it. And people judge a book by its cover, but if you sit down with you for 30 minutes, you're like, holy crap, man, I need more time with this guy. I need to spend more time with him because he's going to teach me something. And that's what I love about you is you do not care what people think about you. You want people to get to know you. And if you get to know you, like that's what I think so interesting about you is you care about people. And if you care enough about people, if they ask questions, you're gonna be transparent. You're gonna tell them exactly how it is. There's no bull crap on. I mean, you're not gonna put icing on it. You're gonna. So that's what I got out of our conversation. I wish we lived in the same city so we could do that once a week because I think, I had that with Greg. Him and he stimulates me as well, mentally stimulates me as well. Let me make sure I
We're going to have to do some serious edits on this podcast. So I, but it's mutual. And, we like to be around people that elevate us or challenge us or, I think that's one of the reasons that contrarians tend to be, most people would not believe if I told them that I am actually more introverted because of what I do. But the more you learn, and the more things you kind of accumulate in terms of knowledge, it's a little weird because you're like, I don't, I'm going to end up in the middle of this conversation, and I'm going to say something that's going to go so far left that everybody sitting at the table is going to go, check, please. Okay, yeah. So I get that. There was something that you said earlier that I wanted to kind of revisit because I know that I have felt it in different periods of my life, and I'm guessing a lot of the people that are listening and seeing this have also thought about it. And that's that 10-year period when you were with the company and you were checking all the boxes that a successful person was supposed to check. And you mentioned something that I know I have felt, and it's weird because it's a hard thing to be able to in the middle of it is the further you get down the path, the harder it is to reconcile it. And that is all these friends that you had in Raleigh, that these, and it's, you look up and, you haven't responded to a phone call in a couple of weeks. And then the next thing you look up, it's been 6 months since and then in a blink of an eye, it's like 2 years and I mean, it accelerates so fast. And it's almost like the longer it takes, the harder it is to kind of turn it around. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you probably did figure out a way to reconcile some of that in that time, or I mean, when that switch kind of went off, and said, this is not the right place for me. This is not um, who I am or where I want to be. How did you, or how are you? Because you may still be doing it, reconnecting with that part of you that was happy, because sometimes you can drift so far away from it that you feel like it's too hard to get back to it. And that's why I think people try to put square pegs wrong in round holes where they are right now to simulate it when it's not real. So how did you kind of flip the coin in the other direction? And that's a horrible metaphor or analogy. I don't think you do flip coins in directions, but you know what I mean.
Right. You know, I think again it goes back to transparency, and I think I think a lot of people have a difficult time being transparent to themselves, right? We always talk about being genuine and honest, and generally we think about that when we're talking to other people. But I think it's almost harder to be honest and straightforward with yourself. And so, if you can be honest with yourself, you give yourself the best chance to define success or define the goals that you want. It's almost like if you're trying to fix a problem, or you're trying to fix a certain scenario, but you've identified the wrong problem, and so now all of your resources are being spent on fixing a problem that actually doesn't exist, or at least isn't the actual problem of the things that you're trying to change. Then you're never gonna change the landscape in a way that works for you. And so I think for me it was, and it's all this stuff is always easier said than done, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, coming off of that lifestyle, traveling around the world, just that whole kind of lifestyle, you identify as that becomes your personal identity, right? I'm successful because I have 12 cars. I am successful because I fly to Hong Kong 4 times a month, right? I am successful because of the way people look at me when I walk through the office. And so that becomes your personal identity, and letting go of that, especially when I did walk away from banking, who was I? Who am I? Right? I don't have those accolades anymore. I don't have that external celebration, right? Of my success is no longer being accommodated by everybody else, or at least recognized by everybody else. So am I no longer a success? Am I no longer? So I think, to answer your question specifically, I think, and this is true for success anywhere, success is dynamic, right? Success is a function of your context. Success at 19 years old is different than success at 40 years old, which is different from success at 65 years old. I think oftentimes we make the mistake of identifying success as the same throughout our life, and so we're chasing the same bone constantly. And we go through periods of depression and things don't feel right, and I'm not happy despite the fact that I've got that bone and 3 other bones. And so I think when you walk away from something like that, it forces you to understand that, one, who am I really? And what do I enjoy? What makes me happy? And then when I did that, I started a blog because I was restless when I left banking, and eventually, it's just a small blog that eventually did quite well. But I remember the first article I wrote was something called Imagine a World. And it was me kind of going through all this cognitive dissonance of imagine a world where, success was defined by the kind acts we do and not the car that we drive. And at the end of it, I kind of qualify it with, look, I'm not trying to preach to anybody. I've kind of found myself with an inordinate amount of shit in my life. I've got piles of things all over the place. And so I'm not probably the right guy to be lecturing anybody on this stuff. But what I'm realizing is that none of this stuff defines who I am. In fact, none of it makes me happy. And so here I am in this moment on a journey to redefine who I am and what does make me happy. And when you understand, when at least you're honest with yourself about that, then you can develop the path that gets you there. But that's a really critical moment. It's a great question that you bring that up, because I think that is almost, if anyone pulls anything from this, it's that exact moment where everybody should do this. And it is a dynamic thing. Everybody should do this as an exercise once every 6 months, once a year, whatever it is. But to say, who am I and what makes me happy? And is the path that I'm on right now taking me there? Yeah, I think that's a really, really great question. I think it's a really kind of profound thing that nobody teaches us this.
So I think that's a great way to redefine your success, what you just told us there. But what I'm interested in is, at this point in your life today, Dad, what's your definition of success right now? What does it look like for you? Like, if you woke up with a magic wand and said, today, if this, and this, and what is this, I would feel successful. So what is it today 10 years ago, you thought it was money, you thought it was cars, that wasn't it. But like now today with your experience at, what, 45, 46 years old, what is it today for you?
Yeah. So there's the real answer,
No,
and
I,
then there's
I want
the
to,
answer that yeah.
and so this is the thing, and I forgot to say this. You know, I think the definition of success is different for every single person on the planet, right? Like my definition of success and what I want in my life now, with a baby on the way, a 2.5-year old, a wife. My definition of success is completely different than it was 5 years ago when I was single, living in Miami, having the time of my life. Right now, I'm having the time of my life in a different context. So
Right.
my success, like you said, has changed, and my paradigm has changed dramatically. But what I'm interested in today is, what does it look like for you? Like, being that, you had to kind of back off this company. You wake up every single day saying, okay, what's next? How am I going to take this company to the next level? What's the next creative thing that's going to come out of COVID? Because like you said, in every failure, there's opportunity. In every, thing that's happening right now, if you're looking, there's opportunity everywhere. And for you today, what is success right now? Like in the next 365 days, what would success look like if you were to have it?
Yeah, I think for me right now, it's clarity, right? So in and amongst what I've just gone through, and the chaos that's ensuing right now, for me, success in the next 365 days, and really over the next 6 months, is to find that path, right? Is identify what that path looks like. And if I can do that, that's a great next step, right? I think if we, ultimately, I just want to be happy, and I want these things. But if you're looking for a very kind of specific, where do you go from here, and what does that look like? It's identifying the next opportunity. So for me, my goal right now is to say, we're testing a lot of different things. I know there's opportunity out there. If in 6 to 12 months I haven't identified that, then it's probably a failure on my part. And if I have identified that and I can now create and implement an executable and viable plan, then I've succeeded through this thing. Yeah.
That's a great. I mean, for people listening, like, I mean, success is identifying my next path, which that in itself stresses the majority of people out, is identifying that path, right? Everyone wants to be on the path. Everyone wants to have the path. Everyone wants to have the answer. And for you, like, you've kind of stepped back and said, hey, success for me would be to identify my next fork and the road that I'm going to take it to the next level. And even if in 6 months it's not successful, and I still got to identify the next path. And I think that's a very, very unique answer that we haven't heard before. Because again, a lot of people come on here and they talk about their success, and they've had a lot of success. But everyone, I don't care how successful you are, there is failure every single year in some aspect of your life. If it's in your marriage, your relationships, your friends, like, and for you, it's just like right now, my focus is identifying the next path. So I love that answer. Great answer.
Yeah, and it ties back to, that answer actually kind of weaves back through a lot of your stories, because success is knowing, what my path is, what my next path is, and you contrast that against, that the backdrop of those 10 years, when really the the stressor was that that path was not your path. And I think that's what a lot of people do, is I don't know what my path is to success. So you know what I'll do is I'll take Thad's path, even though it's not mine, because I don't have to figure it out. It's easier for me just to do a prepackaged path. And sometimes it may take me 6 months to figure out it's the wrong path. Sometimes it takes 10 years to figure out it's the wrong path.
Right.
So I think that is really a huge thing. And I'm listening to you, and I'm learning so much from you, because there's things that you're saying. You're a really smart guy, and so I think there's a lot of what you're saying. Most of what you're saying is very intentional and well thought out. But there's some things that you're dropping here in terms of bombs in my head that I don't even know that you're putting in my head. So one of those things was, um, in the context of this chaos, and knowing who you are and how important it is to know who you are, and where you are now versus where you are 6 months. And, we use the term chaos because that's very appropriate for what's kind of going on right now. What I pulled from what you said that I'm going to hold on to is that it's okay to be in the middle of chaos because that's just life. But you don't have to be chaos, is what I got from you. So, I mean, all of this is chaos, but I'm not chaos. And so, while this is disruptive and, challenging, it probably is not quite as disruptive and challenging as that 10 years was because you know who you are better now in the midst of this chaos. So, I'm hugging that because I think that is something that if I know who I am, I can see the chaos as something that comes and goes. But if I don't know who I am chaos in the middle of chaos. And that's really rough, is because you just feel like, wherever the wind blows, it's going to take you. So I appreciate that perspective because, we can't control COVID, but I can control what I think about when I get up in the morning. That I do have control over. And there's some peace that comes with that, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think, and I love the term prepackaged success, right? I think that's a great way to say it. And again, people look at this again. Maybe this is just a trader's mentality where trades go bad, right? And it's a part of just a part of the game. And like that, again, it goes back to if you're going to take risk, and risk comes in lots of shapes and forms, right? And we all take risk. And if we can get past this kind of embarrassment over failure, and just look at it as it's just another event that happens. It's a natural event. It's like a rainstorm, right? Sometimes the sun shines and sometimes, you get a hurricane. These are just things that happen. It's not something to be embarrassed about. It's not something to frown upon or run from. If you're gonna maneuver in a risky world, you're gonna take some bumps and bruises. So yeah, if we can, it's almost like just changing kind of our perspective of what this means. If I just wanted money, I'd have stayed in banking, right? And so people look and go, oh man, I'm so sorry that this is, your business closed. And to me, it's like, yeah, it sucks, but this is just a hurricane and the sun will shine again tomorrow, right? Like, don't feel bad for me. I don't feel bad for me, right? Like, it is what it is. It's a part of it is. And I do think you're 100% right on this. So one is getting away from this idea that failure is something other than just a natural event in life, right? And also understanding if we know who we are, it's extremely important, right? And if we have a kind of a stability through good times and bad times, in terms of what's our core and what's our center, if we behave in a similar way through good times and bad times, we feel much safer, right? We feel much more comfortable in the day to day. If I'm ecstatic, when times are good, and I'm depressed and when times are bad, I'm afraid of bad times because I know what it does to me, right? But if I know I'm stable during bad times, I'm much more likely to be successful because I'm much more likely to go out and take some risks, knowing there's going to be a rainstorm ahead, but I'm going to be okay when it comes, and the sun will shine the next day, right?
So. Yeah, your perspective. I mean, I'm telling you, most people don't think this way, and I think that's why most people aren't successful, right? Because I mean, you just meet people and you have conversations, and we talk about that conversation that we had. I didn't even fully understand because what you're doing is complex to me, and not in your own head because you have it all figured out. But I just walked away from that saying, this is going to be one successful dude. Like in my success, meaning you're going to have a successful business. You're going to make a lot of other people successful. You're going to have a lot of people on your team that are going to be successful. Like that to me is success. If you can bring people along the road, that's what I walk away from you. And most people are not. I mean, only 1% of the entire world is financially successful at the top, right? I mean, and when I say financially successful, that's all different too. but as far as in the most money in the world, is in the top 1% of people in the world. So, and I think you're going to be one of those people. And I know that's not important to you. And I think that's why you're going to be one of those people, because you don't care about that. You just care about, impacting people's lives. So let me ask you this. I know over the years you've created some habits that you do every single day, that build your business, that develop people in your business. So what would you say one habit that you do every single day that you think has created success in your life?
Yeah, I think honestly, and maybe it sounds trite or ordinary, but I think I think the mind body spirit kind of thing. I'm not great at the spirit, but the mind body. So one of the things that I make sure I do is exercise. Um, I think I think if you it's not even just a physical thing. I think it's very much an emotional and mental thing. I think a well-rounded kind of healthy lifestyle, right? I don't drink a lot. I eat well, and I think those things help. And I'm inquisitive, so I think people who learn, people who read, or these days I guess it's listen on right. We don't do a lot of reading anymore, but we do a lot of listening. So I think it, be inquisitive, right? Try to learn things, and I think the world right now, I'm off social media because I think people don't want to hear other people. I think I think too often on all sides. I think just the generality around the culture these days is we try to self validate, and rather than challenging our own opinions, I think we put a lot of effort into self validation in terms of what our views and opinions are, and I think that hurts everybody. I think it hurts us. So I think if I were to recommend one thing out there, listen more and talk less.
Mm. So here we have Jay, and I know you're tracking this because I'm thinking about it over not just this conversation, but how many folks we've had on our podcast that actually do a disclaimer just before saying what their habit is, like, well, it's probably kind of ordinary, or it probably sounds boring. Hear that over and over again, and it seems like 85% of what follows that is exactly the same thing. Feed your mind, exercise, meditate, um, you know, uh,
Read.
read.
Never
It
heard the
is,
inquisitive one though. That's a good one. I
yes,
like that.
yes. Well, I mean,
I think a habit of listening is a great habit. I think your spot. I mean, you didn't exactly put it in that context, but I think it should become a habit of listening to other people's views. And I think the other habit with that is just to take them into consideration, right? Because we are domesticated beings from a very young age, and we have our opinions and we stick with them, and we don't listen and then be open to the views. And that's what I always like having conversations with you, because you come from a different perspective and you're well read, so it's not really always an opinion. It comes from data and information that you've consumed, and most people have an opinion of other people's opinions that didn't really get it from anybody besides another opinion. um, so that's what I appreciate about having conversations with you and successful people, because usually successful people are not going to be on a soapbox unless they're researched and they really understand like where they're coming from. But a lot of times people with opinions don't listen, and they're not
well,
open.
it's funny. So we are, and I don't know whether this has popped into your head, but it certainly popped into my head the more I learned about and was listening to your story, Thad. So we are in this book club that Jay actually put together a while ago. It's Next Level Book Club. So, and very one of the very awesome things that happened is somebody that was watching a podcast actually decided to join the book club here this last week. So that was really, really cool. Um, the book we're reading right now is called Sapiens. And I don't know if you've read the book Sapiens before, but it's very interesting because it talks about it's a scientific look at how um, us bipeds evolved over time, and the types of decisions we make, and when we became more nomadic to becoming more stable and accumulating stuff, and the more stuff we accumulate, the more issues we have because we want to have more stuff than everybody else and all this stuff. But one of the things that the book talked about is how language evolved initially. And and you make me think about this, because one of the things, and Jay is nodding, because part of what they talked about was that language did not initially evolve to communicate themes and poetry and ideas and everything. Much of how language evolved, or was for cataloging, for systematizing things, be able to find this. So I know that this tablet has been in this room for 400 years because we put it here, and we have a system, and we have knots on a rope that tell us how much, how long or how old something is. So a lot of language was designed to kind of put things in order. And it was later when we started kind of using this system. Well, we can actually use this to create a song or a poem, or express anger or sympathy or rage or whatever it is. And it's a very interesting thing. And the reason I mention this, I'm rambling a little bit here, is because you spend a lot of time studying both ends of that spectrum at the same time. So it's not lost on me, the sociology, philosophy, psychology, and on the other end, economics, and you know uh, so how does a guy that has spent a lot of his early time in a numbers driven world, how does this, if I do this with this lever, I pull this lever, these numbers go here, they move here, they go there, to being the guy that uh, lives in a cabin for 3 years around trees and water? I mean, how do you make that? That just fascinates me. But it's almost like
Fascinated
your,
all.
yeah. Well, it's almost like that life, that transition, that path for you. It's like he's like the first 200 pages of Sapiens, like all in the same guy. So um, was that who you really always were, that guy that needs peace and quiet and solitude, but you just found yourself in this world because you were good at the numbers and all that kind of stuff? Or how did that?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think, and I may have just lost my headphones, but I think, yeah, I happen to be somebody who, it's almost a, man, it's almost a Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing, where I can be very sociable, I can be very extroverted. There are those moments where I'm kind of the party frat boy. But then there's this other side that for a long time people didn't really know, especially in high school. I mean, people close to me knew, but where I was just having very good at math and numbers, but didn't show that a lot.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think there's some truth to that, where people are complex beings, right? Sapiens are complex beings, and I think if we're I think we've got a lot to offer if we're open to kind of really exploring ourselves. And I think over the years I've gotten much better at this as I've gotten older, and there's been some people in my life who have made a profound impact on me in terms of opening up some of those aspects of you in very different realms, right? So yeah, I think I don't know how I ended up inside out in the middle of the woods. It's kind of the dream that nobody does in banking, right? On the big trading floors, we talk about giving it all up and building a cabin in the woods, and
Yes.
God, wouldn't that be nice? Nobody ever does it, except for a few crazy people, I guess, like me, who actually went out and did it. So yeah, I don't know, but I do. One of the things I pick up there is the importance of language, and I think it's incredibly important. And anybody out there who's interested in language should read Wittgenstein. Um, the idea of the conveyance of ideas, and the importance of it. I'm reading a book right now by a guy called Edward Bernays. He's actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud. He wrote a book this back in the 1920s called Propaganda, and it's propaganda is a fancy title, but really it's about PR, right? It's about the conveyance of ideas and how to sell concepts and ideas, and it's stimulating. And in the book, you kind of see how ideas can be conveyed in very different ways. How language really can control, it can control and manipulate in very very subtle ways behavior. And so it's something that shouldn't be overlooked. And I think it is, but I think the fact that you talked about languages, I don't hear many people bring that up, and that's kind of why it stuck out with me, because I'm a big Wittgenstein fan. I love his stuff, and I love the concept of language, because to me, before I read Wittgenstein, well, what language is boring, right? It's just words. But when you really dig into language, and I'm glad that you picked up on that. Like I said, very few people ever actually do. It is one of the most important things that we have. So yeah, for me, I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of a mixed bag, but I do love that concept of language. I think it's something that people should focus on. I think you guys should talk about that more and more.
Yeah, I mean, language is fascinating to me, and you should read *Sapiens*. It's a very college textbooky, a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of information in there on societies, and the money part now, and how money was created, and you know how we all agreed on money, and how it became valued.
Yeah, I'm gonna read it.
It's a very very interesting thing on how Sapiens gave a silver coin that was handmade an actual value and weighed, and just how money evolved. But back to what you were talking about earlier, the language, and the crazy thing about language that I'm studying a lot now is how much meaning language gives to everything, because really there is no meaning unless the meaning we give to it, right, through our words, right? So whatever we describe or however we say something to someone, they can take different meaning from it based on tonality, based on our body language. And it doesn't mean that. Like, I'll say something to my wife and it'll be completely nice, and she'll look at my eyes or my body language and be like, you're full of crap, right? I mean, you're just saying that. It doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless what you're saying to me. And I think language is really the only thing that gives anything meaning, and it is really used to manipulate. I mean, that's
Well,
we
yeah,
abuse
Yeah, for
it can be.
better or worse, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You can manipulate toward truth, or you can manipulate away from truth.
correct.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I think it's like I said, it's one. Well,
Use it as a weapon, obviously, and it creates a lot of bad things as well as some good things, through motivation and success and all those other things. If someone's bringing something good, but a lot of times people misuse it and abuse it, and so you have to, what you said earlier made me think, contradictory towards, you have to be careful who you listen to, because if you listen to the wrong people, they could take you down the wrong path. And that's another thing you have to be careful of. Listen more, but listen and say, do I want to listen more to this person? Do I want to listen less to this person? And
So I agree with you, but this is one of these are the moments. This is why I love doing the
podcast,
podcast.
I
Is
know, I
that
can tell that you want to disagree.
I like listening. I crave opportunities to listen to people that I disagree with, or that I don't align myself, or even people that I don't necessarily feel are great influences, because when I listen to them, I can it on the one end of the spectrum, I can understand, because I like to argue, so I can develop a counter argument when I understand it and hear where they're coming from. I mean, that's what a lot of law is just making an argument. But the other part, let me finish this one thing, is that it also allows me to, when I listen, I've never heard, as I'm gotten older, even the people I don't agree with, I've never listened and left the conversation the same as I entered the conversation. It's always changed me. So sometimes it strengthens my position, sometimes it augments my position. Um, but what it does is it allows for me to kind of understand the simplest way I think I'd say it, and this is what my ninth grade Spanish teacher, Ida de la Cruz, taught us. She said, language is not vocabulary, it's culture. And I didn't understand that as a 13-year-old because I was like, well, Spanish just has a bunch of different words, then German has a bunch of different words. But and the more traveled we make ourselves, like you've traveled quite a bit, Thad. I know Jay's traveled quite a bit. I've had an opportunity to get, outside of the bubble of where I live, and you understand that language is absolutely culture. So it's music is language. Arguments are language. It's about a conveyance of thought. And uh, if I hear someone and I'm listening and I'm trying to figure out where I'm trying to go in terms of who I should listen to, uh, I try to make sure to listen to those people that I don't agree with intentionally, because it's easy for me to dismiss them because they don't align with me. But when I listen to them, I'm like, okay, I don't agree with it, but I can enter a conversation now with them at a different place because at least I understand where it's coming from, even if I don't agree with it. And I think one of our challenges societally is that disagreement has become a pariah. Like if Dad says this thing and I say this thing, then we don't just simply disagree anymore. We're enemies because we don't see things the same way. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the devolution of our society if we're not careful. So that dialogue is important, even with people that you don't agree
And,
with. So,
and I agree with you, and I'm glad you
Mhm.
stated that. But what I was saying is, you have a different mentality. You're also a lot older than me in experience. So, um,
Wow, thanks.
just kidding. I
Yeah, that
so,
that took longer. That took longer in the
I know,
podcast than it
I know.
normally does.
Way
Normally, it's a
longer.
shot in
But
20 minutes. Yeah.
but I guess for the people listening, like when I say be careful, like you have to be open, like you said, to take everything in, listen, and then just not be manipulated by
Mhm.
people. And I think a lot of people are manipulated by language. In the right way sometimes if you're open to it, to hearing, even if it's learning what not to do, but you have a different experience. And I think it's really, you have to be really, really careful, because there's people that listen to some things that make them join some cults and some groups and go down paths that they shouldn't go down. So that's I think that was really, really good that you said. I mean, listen with open ears, and I think what you finish with is, I think debate is healthy. I think debate is healthy, and having a conversation with that about something that I might not agree on, I walk away from the conversation saying, and if you walk away saying, I wonder if he is onto something. And I think that's what, the dynamic
Mhm.
I
No
have.
doubt.
We walk away and we might not agree and we come back. So I'm going to wrap this up quickly. That I want to ask you a couple more questions, and you might have something to add. You're on mute. I don't know if you know that or not, but
I
um,
think when the AirPods came out,
oh, okay. So I'm going to ask you this question, Lola, and maybe help unmute him if you can. Oh, he got it.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
No,
guys.
no worries. So I know you don't have kids, but through talking to you, I've never asked you this question before, but I'm pretty sure everything and all the time and effort and you building these companies, legacy is important to you. Like, you wouldn't be doing all this studying and filling your brain with all this great information if you didn't want to leave a legacy one day, and whatever that may be, right? Legacy is a different thing too. But let's just imagine for a second the three people that you care the most about in your life, and you could leave three things with them that you want to be known for, that they're going to live their life on for the rest of their lives, to carry on from generation to generation to generation, that they learned from that. What would those three things be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think confidence, kindness, and I guess self-awareness. I don't know. I mean,
That's
they're
very,
not physical things that come to mind. What pop into my mind are
that's exactly what I'm looking for. Exactly.
okay.
Those are great. So let me ask you.
And I don't say that. When I say that, I don't mean to. When I say those things, I don't mean to sound like I'm pandering to kind of a narrative that everybody wants to. What I truly mean is it makes a tremendous difference in lives when people have those things. I truly believe in those things. I truly believe those things are incredibly important. And if people can, if anyone I know, if I can instill that into somebody, and I know that because of what's been instilled to me as a, growing up as a kid. I didn't have someone around very often, but what I do walk away from very often, and what I do say about what was provided to me, and one of the reasons that I've had the successes that I've had, and I've had the life that I've had, is there were certain things that were instilled into me, of certain value systems that were instilled to me, and I'm grateful. Where I probably back a lot of things, but I'm still able to see how incredibly powerful certain traits that were instilled into me, ingrained into me, have allowed me to do the things that I've done.
My favorite one on this podcast is self-awareness. I think most
incredibly important, and it really feeds into everything else.
Yes, it does.
It helps you be confident and it helps you be kind. I mean,
exactly. It really it does. It feeds into you as a person, right? So yeah.
What's your biggest regret in life so far?
It's a big list.
Just one. What's your biggest regret?
I tell you what. Probably the thing that comes to mind was when I had, and it's probably just fresh in my mind because I thought about it yesterday. When I went to take my first job, and I didn't mention this in the story, but when I went to take my first job, I had interviewed also. So I interviewed with the banks, and I also interviewed in DC with the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And at the building there's 8 floors, and the 8th floor is very top secret. It's very locked down, and that's where all the GDP numbers come from. And when I interviewed there was 2 elderly gentlemen. One was quite nice, and one was was quite abrupt. And so I interviewed with these 2 gentlemen, and I left, and then I had interviewed with the bank, and the bank came back and offered me a job. And I called. I wanted the BEA job. I wanted the economist job. The decision didn't come in time, so the bank forced me to say yes or no. I said yes, and it turned out, financially, it turned out quite well. The BEA then called about a month after I had started at the bank and offered me the job.
Oh, wow.
And I remember I called my father, actually, and said, what do I do? His recommendation was to stay in the private sector and go for the money. And so I did. And that's something that over the years I've thought about a lot, and that's probably because it was a moment in time where I would have had a very different path in life. So it's a moment that, and who knows, right? You can always assume that the other path was going to be full of happiness and roses and puppies. So that's how I see it. And not that, it would have been a worse thing if I had, flunked out of the bank and didn't do anything. But even having the success that I've enjoyed, that's a moment in my life that if I were to do it again, I probably would make a different choice.
All right. I'm surprised to hear that from you.
Is that right? Can I ask why?
I don't know. Just I feel like the adventure, I'll say, that you've had, and who you are and who I've talked to. I'm just surprised that you would regret a decision to go down a route that was more maybe safe than the risky route that you have gone down. So I'm just surprised to hear that from you, which is a good surprise.
Right.
The reason I asked that question is because I like to hear those types of things, but I like the surprise because I would
Yeah.
never in a million years think that because
Right.
you took the risky route because that was
I
more
did.
safe.
Well, but I think if we dig into why I regret it is because I think I wasn't true to what I wanted. I didn't, right? I thought I wanted the money because that's what everybody, having come out of the schools that I came out of with the degrees that I had, banking and investment banking and trading, like this was what I was supposed to do. Kind of like Reagan was saying, the prepackaged success story. When I think back of it, my heart was really around economics, right? And maybe not a lot of people understand that there's a big difference between the study of economics and finance, but there really is. My heart was in economics. I would have, and so I think my disappointment and my regret, and I really don't say this much, I always just kind of say, oh, if I could do it again, I'd probably take that job.
Right.
Digging a little deeper than that, the reason I regret it is because I wasn't true. I didn't do what I wanted to do. I did what everybody else wanted me to do. And that, in my mind, really sticks with me. It pops in my head quite often over the years. Even as a successful, while I was enjoying the seven figures, I thought back often about how I secretly wish I would have taken that other job.
We've had you for a long time, but I got to tell you, because when you said it, it didn't surprise me, and I've not known you as long. It didn't surprise me because of what I heard you share earlier, especially when you were talking about the blog that you wrote, and as you started identifying where the issues were, and then people started saying to you, okay, we get the issues, so where's the implementation? That to some degree that would have allowed you to actually kind of impact the mechanisms of it. Who knows what's on what scale, but that would have put you in a place where you could actually kind of influence the levers that people were asking you for. Once you identified the issue and they started saying, where are you going? That would have been a place where you might have been able to pull those levers a little bit more differently, uh,
True.
because of what was important to you.
I think that's true, and I didn't know at the time. And that's probably not why I had the regrets. Is because it's. But I think you're right, and I do think that now is, man, if I was in that, I probably wouldn't have ended up in that job, but it would have opened doors and jobs where I could have impacted policy, and that is important to me. At the time, I didn't know that it was. I think truly the regret is that I wasn't true to myself, and in that is probably what you're saying, which is where my heart is on this kind of this other thing. And again, like I said, the grass is always filled with puppies and butterflies when you're talking about the path you didn't take. And Jay, to your point, I'm not. The regret isn't something that the life I've had, I still feel good about, right? But if you're asking me to pinpoint kind of a moment that pops in my head where if I were to have an opportunity to do it again, that's probably the one that I would.
No, what I was looking for was be true to what you want. And that's the takeaway for me is I think we have regrets because we're not true to what we want. And people that are listening that are thinking about, let me go safe, or let me do, go all out, whatever it is that you want in your life, that's the decision that you should make so that you don't have those regrets. And that's what I was trying to get out of you there. When you said that, I was like, now I get it, right? Because you didn't make a decision for you, even though your father said you should do this, you were still thinking, man, I don't know. And then you listened to your father, you went down the easy road instead of taking the road and going and making a decision to leave the bank. So I love that. So one last question. I know you read a lot. 3 most recommended books people listening should read or listen to.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So
I want different, not the common ones. I want Thad books. I want people that.
Okay, and that's what I was going to say. I don't do a lot of honestly. I've read.
I know.
I've done some of the books that Jay's.
I would recommend books to you because I'm just like he's gonna be no. This is great.
But so there are books that I would recommend to people. There is a series of essays, and probably because it's fresh in my head, by Edward Bernays called The Engineering of Consent. I think he wrote them maybe in the early 30s. And I think especially relevant in this day and age is understanding the importance of the narrative. And I think it helps give context to the world today, right? I think I think there's a lot of confusion out there. I think there's more information than people can handle, and I think we've lost the concept of what's true and what isn't. And so I think, without going too deep into it, I think the essays, engineering of consent, was incredibly helpful for me. I also and again, I think one of the, and again, I'm a contrarian. You've got to remember where this comes from. So Animal Farm, I think, is a profound book, and it's an easy read and it's a fun read. But I think it's an incredibly profound piece of literature. So Animal Farm by Orwell. And this is kind of goofy, and I don't know if people giggle when I say this, but like Plato's Republic, I think has a tremendous amount of I don't agree with the idea of the philosopher kings, but I think, to Greg's point of listening to the other side and understanding where that perspective comes from, Plato was an elitist through and true, but he's an incredible thinker. And so when you look at kind of the Socratic method, it allows people, I think something that's not taught a lot in the schools today and not discussed is logic, and being able to understand syllogism, following ideas through. And there's a lot of, in that Socratic method, it touches on things that we've talked about today, which is language, the manipulation of people's thoughts and behaviors through language. And that's exactly what that book is. But it's got a tremendous amount of concepts and ideas that just help people. The cave parable. So I would say, these aren't things that are directly linked to how do I become successful. These are things that allow us to think quite well. These are books that allow us to understand the world around us, and how the world, not so much how we interact with the world, but how the world interacts with us.
Well, this was a great podcast. Very, very deep, thoughtful podcast, and I that's why I wanted to invite you on here, Thad, because I knew we would get that out of you today. And we are trying to bring all kinds of different minds and success. And I honestly, did not know, because we didn't talk much before this, that that was going on in your business. And I just love that you were transparent and shared that, because
Absolutely.
right now, the timing of everyone else going through that, like you said, I mean, of all the family-owned businesses, 30% of them, are out of business in the first 2 months of a pandemic. And I think a lot of people need this right now, to know that they're not alone, and that there is a future, and that you have to look for the opportunities that are going to come our way, instead of sulking and, like you said, sulk for a little bit, and then dust yourself off and see what's next, and what's the path you're going to go on next. So right now I want to share just the ingredients of Thad's success, and I know success is different for you, and you're going to find it, I think, more than anybody I know, and that's just something that I feel about you, and I'm sure you have that confidence and feel the same thing about yourself, and that's what keeps you going. So to start off is, you always question everything, which I think is always good. Always be inquisitive. What appears to be success might not be success for you. Success in personal relationships is success. You are where you are. So embrace it. Redefine success every 6 months, every year. Project reality. Man, hold on, I might mess this one up. Dang, I couldn't get through it. If you project reality that's not true, you will miss opportunities. Failure is not a reflection. Failure happens with risks. Failure can and should be exciting. Love that one. Success is about being focused. Be transparent with yourself. Success can be your identity if you allow it to be. But who you are is who you are. Success is dynamic. Success is having clarity. You need to identify your path, not someone else's. Figure out your own path that is going to make you happy. Get over the embarrassment over failure. What keeps you, your habits that keep you going is your mind, body, soul, being inquisitive, and you listen more than you talk. And I know that to be true because I've sat down and had conversations and I keep asking you questions to dig stuff out of you. What you want your legacy to be and what you want to be known for and what you want to share with other people is to always be confident, to always be kind, and most importantly, you can't be those two if you're not self-aware. Your biggest regret, the real big takeaway is always be true to what you want and not what others want. And the most recommended books, which Lola's really good, she put those up really, really fast. If you guys are watching this, is Bernays Engineering Consent, Animal Farm, and Republic. And those are definitely not any book that's ever been recommended on this podcast before. And the thing is we're reading Sapiens right now, and it's not an easy read. There's a lot of information and a lot of history and a lot of years, and I hated history, and when I was in school, it wasn't my favorites. I know you. That's why you love it. It wasn't my favorite subject, but I'm getting a lot out of it to understand human beings, and that's what I hope the book club, that people are, if you just embrace it and kind of go along this journey and have an open mind. And I think that's, what most people listening to you today have to have an open mind. Most people that listen to our podcast have to have an open mind and be open to failure. And I think that's the biggest takeaway today is to be open to failure, not be embarrassed by it, be transparent about it, and, pass on your lessons to other people. And I'm just so happy to know you. I'm happy to have you on here. I'm happy to have a conversation. I'm happy to have that conversation that we had a couple years ago. And you are a true good soul, Mr. Thad. And I'm so glad that I met you in my life. And I just can't wait to celebrate all the success that's in your future, that I know is in your future, and maybe have you back on here on the podcast and kind of talk about that again. I think that would be awesome. Well, one more question. Do you know anybody that you think we should have on here that's been in your path that would that we could learn from?
Yeah, I'm sure I know all kinds of people.
Maybe
Yeah,
the CEO and tell him how much of a mentor he was, and we should talk to him.
yeah. I think Rick Farina or Richard Sandor. These are financial industry guys that are incredibly empathetic to the world around them. I think guys like that are incredibly interesting. Guys who have had success beyond most of our wildest dreams, who stay very grounded, and hold on to that kindness. I think, So I think, Rick Farina or Richard Sandor would be incredible guests to have on it.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be
awesome.
awesome. We would love maybe if you could reach out and tell them that they should be on here, and maybe be a good time for you to get out of your shell and reconnect with somebody that impacted your life. Could be
It does sound like a good opportunity.
We appreciate you, Thad. That you did. You exceeded your billing in what Jay told me about you in advance of this, and man, we're all richer for this conversation. So thank you so much.
And just one last note, he could be an investor maybe in your future thing too. I'm just saying, maybe if you reconnect, because I'm sure he liked you as much as everybody else that likes you. So just a thought, you might want to.
I've already hit him up, actually.
Of course you did.
Well, thank you guys. This was an incredible amount of fun. It's super interesting, and I love that you guys are doing this, and I know there's a tremendous amount of good coming out of this podcast that you guys do. I'm a fan, and I'll be a listener from here on in. You guys
All right, man. We appreciate you, Thad. Thanks so much, man.
Cheers, guys.